Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to class this afternoon. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching. Whether you're here with me live right now or you're watching this recorded later on, I just want to let you know that I appreciate it. First of all, I told you yesterday, advising day. Keep an ear open for it. It's coming. We'll have a date soon, and today we have a date. It's going to be on October the 19th. That's a Tuesday, from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. So it's October 19th on a Tuesday, 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. I know that that's something that not all of you would be able to attend, but if you are able to attend on that day, it would be great for us to see you and just consult with you a little bit just to make sure that you're taking exactly what you need for that final semester. If you're not able to attend on that day, get in touch with us and we will help you out at another time. But ideally, we'd like to cover everything on that day. Like if you need a graduation form filled out, we'll have people there to help us with those. All sorts of stuff, so it's good to take advantage of and it's good to do. That's October the 19th, 10 a.m., room 3200, the programming lab. Please join us if you can. We'll be also posting that as an announcement in the course over the next day or two. Another big announcement is for next week. Next week is fall break. You'll notice that the next module in the course is scheduled to have 2 weeks on it. Right, like this current module that we're in right now is due on Sunday, and then the next one has 2 weeks scheduled on it. It really only needs one. It has that extra week built into it for fall break. So next week you will have the week off. So you can take advantage of that. There won't be anything due. We won't be starting, I mean, technically, according to the calendar, we're starting something new. But it's fine. There won't be a regular live stream. There won't be anything due on the following Sunday, which is the 11th, something like that, right? Or when is that? No, the 10th. The 10th. Yeah. Won't be anything due on the 10th. And we'll be covering the new material the week following fall break there. So, it's all good. Right? Take the week next week. Relax. We've made it roughly through the middle of the semester now. It's all good. So if you have any questions on any of that, please let me know. But just to summarize again, October 19th, 10 a.m., room 3200. Advising day. No live stream next week. Enjoy your fall break. Now today, we're talking about something that I really like. And we'll also do some code today. Why not? I really, really, really like talking about digital color. It's one of my most favorite things. I could probably do an entire course just on this topic of, color and color theory and how digital color works and the different color spaces and all this kind of nonsense and foolishness. And really, color is kind of at the core of our design building blocks, right? Like a lot of what we do in terms of making something interesting, in terms of drawing people in terms of adding emphasis, making things aesthetically pleasing, it all revolves around color. And so I think it's a good idea for us to take some time and just examine color, examine different types of color, different color models, look at some color theory, just so we're fully wrapping our heads around color. So that's what we're going to talk about today. All right, I like to tell my colleagues, when I get to this module, they'll ask me like, "Oh, what are you doing in this class this week?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm teaching them about colors." Just because it's kind of funny when we think about college students learning about color, but it's completely different than what you might be used to. So when we're thinking about digital color, what we're thinking about is the RGB color model. And this is something that you've heard of before, I'm sure, because we talked about it a little bit in the Web 115 course, right? Like everything kind of builds, right? So we talk a little bit about digital color and how we work with it and how we can use like RGB color codes, hex codes to define colors. But when we're talking about digital color in particular, we're talking about the RGB color model. And when we say color model, let's just define that term. A color model is a group of colors identified in a way that computers can understand. So there are several different color models that we utilize in a digital space. However, the one that is purposed for digital presentation is the RGB color model. You might also hear of various CMYK color models. And these are set-up color models designed to mimic print. So these are for CMYK color models are for print applications, while RGB color models are for digital display. Which, since we're working on website design, that's exactly what our focus is on a digital display, right? Like nobody's going to worry an incredibly lot about making sure that your website prints out nicely, right? Like that's not what we're dealing with here. We're using this RGB digital display color model. And so when we have RGB, that's red, green, blue. These are our primary colors, right? And primary colors are the basic colors that cannot be created by mixing other colors. And now I know what you might be thinking. You're thinking, wait a minute, Mr. Ramsey. I went to kindergarten. And in kindergarten, they taught me the primary colors were red, blue, and yellow. And now here we are, 15, 20 or more years later, and you're telling me you have the audacity to get on the internet and tell me that the primary colors are red, green, and blue. What gives? And that's completely accurate, right? When you're mixing paint, you're doing this sort of, you're doing that sort of process with paint where you're using this physical media and you're taking paint and you're mixing it together, or you're taking different shades of crayon and you're mixing it together. With the way that the light kind of bounces off these different colors, we can mix these two colors together and make a secondary color. But in those instances, we are talking about red, blue, and yellow, right? We learned back in kindergarten, red and blue make violet or purple. Blue and yellow make green. Red and yellow make orange. And that's all well and good for standard physical media, but we're not talking about physical media anymore. We're talking about digital media. And in digital media, things are a whole lot different. These are our primary colors. There's no other way to make red, green, and blue using light from the spectrum So we have to have these colors as a primary. So that means that our primary colors are our colors that we can get by mixing these primary colors. And I've got a good graphic on the next screen that really exhibits this. When we combine three different colors of light like this, you know, what we're doing is we're essentially intensifying the color range. Or we're combining different intensities of light to produce a whole color range, and we call this additive color mixing. right? Because we can always kind of add more light. There's also subtractive color mixing, which is what gets us in our print space, and that's where we get the CMYK colors. For print, that CMYK color is a subtractive color process. But in our additive color mixing, we are using different intensities of light at different values to mix together and create different colors of light. And so the RGB color model uses red, green, and blue primary colors plus different intensities of light to create colors on an electronic display like your computer screen. And if you look at this graphic down here in the lower corner, and I'll even zoom into it just to make sure that we're all, able to see this very nicely here. We see our 3 primary colors here. Right, and it's pretty clear. Like, we see our green here. We see our blue here. And we see our red here. And so these are our 3 primary colors. These are the colors of light that's being shown onto this wall. And in the in-between places where they mix, we see this kind of Venn diagram about how additive color mixing works. And these mixed colors here in this additive color mixing space might look very familiar, or, they might sound very familiar to some other colors that I've been mentioning so far. Like, if we mix red and green in the same intensity, we get yellow. If we mix blue and red in the same intensity, we get magenta. If we mix blue and green at the same intensity, at the highest level of intensity, we get cyan. And if we have fully intense red, green, and blue and mix them all together at once, you see there in the very middle we get white. White light. Which is why we often say that white is not a color, black is not a color, white is all of the colors. Right? Because we're mixing full intensities of red, green, and blue in equal parts to get white. So it's all of the light just thrown at this thing to give us white light. And then we see where there are black areas of our image. That's just where the light isn't. So if there's no light intensity, there's no light, there's no color. Just blackness. So hopefully you can start to see here where we're kind of going with this. Right? We get all of these different colors of light. We can mix these different colors of light in different intensities, and we can make a whole spectrum of colors. And we can talk a little bit about like how exactly we mix these colors in just a little bit. But maybe you're starting to understand here some things that we can do. Right? Like, for example, one of the things that I always like to say is, like when I use an orange, I'll typically say, orange is 2 times red than green. Right? So when we're making orange, we have a doubly intensive red versus an only singly intensive green. Why? Well, we can use the knowledge that we gained from kindergarten for that, right? Because we can see that red and green at the same intensity give us yellow. Well, what did we learn in kindergarten makes orange? Well, red and yellow. So if we have equal parts of red and yellow, or red and green rather, to give us yellow, and then we add another part of red in there, we get orange. So there's that, and we'll talk about that more as we kind of progress here. Because what we see when we deal with this is we see the RGB triplet form. The RGB triplet, we get, and each number in the RGB triplet is some variation of light intensity. right? And the scale for the intensity of light runs from 0 to 255. So this is kind of difficult color mixing, and a little later on, we'll have easier colors that we can look at. But we have three values here, one for the intensity of red, one for the intensity of green, one for the intensity of blue. And if you look there in the lower right-hand corner, you see like the color picker window, and you see there in the lower right-hand corner of the lower right-hand corner, those red, green, blue values for that violet that's been selected in the image. Right, it's red 155, green 109, blue 214. Red 155, green 109, blue 214. These same values are the values that are in a hex color, right? They're just represented differently. Hexadecimal is base 16, right? So let's fire this up here. Hexadecimal. Hex is base 16. Which means we have numbers going from 0 to 15, right? Because 0 is the 16th number. So we have numbers represented from 0 to 15. Now, we can't represent 10, two-digit numbers as a single digit, right? So that's when we switch to letters, right? So when you've seen hexadecimal colors, what you've seen are these color triplets that also have letters in them, or color couplets, a triplet of color couplets that also have letters in them, right? Because it's 3 two-digit pairs, one for red, one for green, one for blue. And you probably remember back to like maybe some of the early networking classes, or maybe from when we've talked about binary before and we looked at like the binary places. And we say that our different binary places are 2 to the power of whatever place, 2 to the n, right? So like the first one's 2 to the 0, second one's 2 to the 1, 2 to the 2, 2 to the 3, 2 to the 4, so on and so forth. Well, our base 16 numbers also work the same way. It's 16 to the power of the place. So we got these three numbers from that violet that was on the screen earlier. Right? They were 155 for the red value, 109 for the green value, and 214 for the blue value. So what we can do here is we can take each of these numbers and we can convert them to their hex pairs relatively easily so we can get that hex number. So let's go ahead and put our hashtag right there. And let's just convert these numbers. Right? So we said that our hexadecimal number pairs, or our hexadecimal color codes, are 3 number pairs, 2 for red, 2 for green, 2 for blue. Right? And these numbers can run anywhere from 0 to 15, which in practice is from 0 to 9, and then from A to F. So since we're working on number pairs, we know that all of our numbers are going to be number pairs. We can take and we can assume some things that are going to help us out here, right? We're going to have 2 places, because all of our numbers are pairs. And we're going to have 16 to the 0 and 16 to the 1 in all of these. These are our places. Right, so 16 to the 0, anything raised to the power of 0 is automatically 1. Anything raised to the power of 1 is automatically itself. So essentially what we're looking at here is we're looking at the values of 1 and 16. Right, so we know that if we take, like, say, the full value FF, right, 255 equals FF in our hex, in hexadecimal, right? So if we take 255 and divide it by 16, we get 15.9, right? So we get 15. We get that F value. Right, so what we want there is we want that remainder. So if I say 15 times 16, well, that equals 240. 255 minus 240. That's 250, that's 15. So that's F for 15, F again for 15. So let's look at our three color pairs here and let's determine those. Right, so we'll do our red color here, our green color here, and our blue color here. So what we're going to do is we're going to figure out that first digit here. We're going to take 155 and we're going to divide it by 16. And I've got a calculator out here in front of me just so it'll help me out. And we're going to see that that first digit is a 9. So now in turn, I can take 16 and multiply it by 9 and get 144. 155 minus 144 is 11. 11 we represent with a B. So the first couplet in that is a B, is 9B. That's the first pair of numbers in our three pairs of numbers here to get this hex value. Let's solve the second one. We'll take 109 and divide it by 16. That gives us 6. So if we flip that logic, just so we can get the other number, we say 6 times 16, that equals 96. 109 minus 96 equals 13. So 13 in this case, 10 is A, 11 is B, 12 is C, 13 is D. So our second character here is 6D. Finally, we have 214, so we can take 214, divide it by 16. That gives us 13.375, right? So we already know that 13 is D. So we can put our 13 here. Then we can take 13 times 16. That's 208. 214 minus 208 is 6. So our last number here is 6. So if we take those three RGB intensity values that run from 0 to 255 and convert them into hex, it's those exact same numbers that we use to get these hex codes. Right, we're just converting them into, we're converting the decimal numbers into hex numbers. So we can standardize it. And that tells us that this color code for that violet that we saw on the previous screen is 9D, or 9B rather, 6D, D6. So if we were looking at that code, or looking at that color, 155 red, 109 green, 214 blue, That's 9B, 6D, D6. Right, and so we can take that. Let me just open up a browser window here. One of the great things here is that we can Google hex colors, and they give them to us. And that's 9B, 6D, D6. We should see it's that nice violet color there, which is the same color as what we have in that screenshot there for those values. So that proves that that's the way that we do that. We're getting the same color values here. Now, while we're here, I like to point out that Google has a really nice color picker. Right, so if you're looking for some color code, you're looking for something really quickly, Google is the way to go here. Because you can get the hex value, you can get the RGB values. Right there we can see our RGB values, and we can see that they're the exact same as what we have here. 155, 109, 214, we can see them here. That again proves that we know what we're talking about. And so when we're looking at these RGB values that give us the intensity of the color, and we're looking at those hexadecimal values that we see a lot of times used on websites, we can see that, they're the same thing, right? The higher the number, the greater the intensity. Once you start leading one of those triplets with some kind of, or one of those couplets in the triplet with some kind of letter, that just means it's a higher number. Right, so learning how to convert hex to decimal and vice versa is a cool party trick, right? Like, we can have a good understanding of the way color works when we see a demonstration like that. But it's not really going to be necessary for us to do, right? Because we have color pickers and things that give us all that information. And we also have an even better way of representing color that we're going to discuss in just a moment. But these different intensities come along the part of the RGB spectrum. And we can see the RGB spectrum here. This when we are looking at the RGB spectrum, like we have on the right-hand side here, that is all of the perceivable colors by the human eye that are in the standard RGB spectrum. And on the left-hand side here, you see the wavelength at which these colors are coming through. So you see that the red has the highest amplitude of a wavelength, the green is in the middle, and the blue is the lowest amplitude of the wavelength. For our general purposes, since we're not doing, a whole course on the way digital color works, right, this is just like a fun to know thing. That red is the highest amplitude of the wavelength of visible light or whatever. I guess you can probably impress people with that at parties. But it's something good for us to point out as we, again, are trying to just kind of wrap our heads around the idea of color. Now, one of the things that is interesting is that the fact that there are different color models, and we talk about an HSB color model here. And I'm actually going to move past this pretty quickly in favor of an HSL color model, because the HSL model is the fun and easy color model that we've brought into the web design world now. Like, if you use a lot of graphic design programs, something that you'll find is they might have HSB, HSL, and or HSV color models in them. And this is just a different way that we can use to represent color. And we say here that the HSB and subsequently the HSL, these are color models that are based around the human perception of color. And so instead of a red intensity value, a green intensity value, and a blue intensity value, we use a hue, which is our H. We use a saturation, And depending on the model, we're using a brightness, lightness, or value, B, L, and V. And like they kind of sound like they'd be the same thing, but they are slightly different between like a brightness and a lightness. And a brightness, lightness, and value. Like they sound like they'd be similar, but they're slightly different, right? Like they give you a slightly different color if you look at something in an HSB color model versus an HSV color model. And so let's look at that HSL color model. HSL is hue, saturation, and lightness. Right? So we can use hue, saturation, and lightness, the HSL color model, in any CSS rule that accepts color. And when we are creating an HSL color in CSS, we need to have 3 attributes for it. Hue, which is the degree number of the color based on the color wheel. We represent it as only the number in an HSL. Saturation, which is on a percentage. Higher percentage, more saturated. Lower percentage, less saturated. And finally, lightness, which again is on the same sort of percentage scale. The lower the percentage, the darker the color. The higher the percentage, the lighter the color. So here at the bottom, we can see a representation of the syntax of that color. And we can also get a good idea of what that color is. Right? Because one of the big benefits about hue, saturation, lightness, color model versus the RGB way of representing colors is that it's a lot easier to determine what a color is. Right? Because if we're using the hex values, especially, and we're trying to determine, or really the RGB values in general, and we're trying to determine what a color is based on those RGB values alone, or based on those hex values alone, we have to kind of think in our head and like do some mixing in our head and do some calculations in our head and say, oh, we've got about 2 times more red than we have blue, so that means it's going to be a purple, but we also have a little bit of green mixed in, so that'll knock it back some in terms of like saturation, so it'll make it a little less saturated. Whereas with HSL, we base the hue, we base the actual color that we're dealing with on that first number, which we get from the color wheel. And this is our HSL color wheel. So we can see as we move around the color wheel, 60 degrees, we change colors. So red is at 0 degrees, yellow is at 60 degrees, green is at 120 degrees. Right, what we can see here, though, even though this is an easier way to represent color, the fundamentals of color that we've already kind of discussed here are still at play, right? Because we said red and green makes yellow, and well, if we look halfway between red and green there, that's where yellow lies, at 60 degrees. And then we see it cyan at 180 degrees, blue at 240 degrees, magenta at 300 degrees, and then we're all the way back around to red. And one of the fun, cool, easy things about this is that we can keep going in CSS, right? Like it's like a clock, right? So our CSS, even if we go past red or past green or past blue, you know, if we go all the way around the circle or go in the negative direction around the circle, it'll keep just moving along respectively, accordingly. Right, so I got a fun demo for us to do before we get into all of that, right? But I also think it'd be kind of interesting if we just did a little something to see these colors in action before we get to that demo. So let's just take and create a little site that will put a random background generator on. So let's see here. I've got a Visual Studio Code window here, if I can find it, with an environment already in it. And I will run, so we don't have to switch back and forth. I will run a live server with this. So here's our live server. You can see I've created a local server for myself here. It's at 127.0.0.1 at port 5500, and this is index.html. And what I'd like to do here is just use a little bit of JavaScript to kind of create just a random background color on refresh using our HSL syntax. Right, so if we zoom in here, we'll write this script in our body. And instead of doing it in a different file, we'll just do it in script tags. We'll say type equals JavaScript. And I think it's text/JavaScript. And we will just add something here that gives us a random background color. So the first thing that we'd want to do is create some kind of variable that we put a random number in, right? So we'll just use our standard JavaScript random number finder, which is, so we'll set that to, we'll set a variable with the name of into math.floor math.random. So math.random gives us a random number between 0 and 1. So it's going to give us some kind of floating point number. And then we'll multiply that floating point number by the amount of numbers that we can have in our HSL color, which it's a full circle. So we can have 360 degrees in a circle. If we used 360, it would make it slightly off, right? Like it would kind of bias the random nature of everything, because technically you'd have 0 and 360 that could both be that pure red color. So we'll say 359 here. And then the math.floor will round that down to the next lowest whole number. So if the random number pulls a 0, we get 0 times 359, which is still a 0. If the random number pulls a 1, we get 1 times 359, which is 359. So we get that pure red if it pulls a 0. We get that almost pure red if it pulls a 359, which gives us a better random number chance here. And then so what we'll do here is we'll just set the value of backgrounds, or the background color value on the body. So that's going to be document query selector body dot style dot background color equals, and we'll have to do a little bit of concatenation here because that's HSL. Open parenthesis, concatenate that with our variable n, concatenate that with comma, we'll say 75%, and also comma 75%. So we're giving ourselves a random color from somewhere on that color wheel that we looked at in our diagram there in the slide presentation. That's creating that here when it creates the variable. It's going to stick it here in this HSL color syntax. It'll have 75% saturation, 75% lightness. So we should be able to save this and check out our live server now. And now our background color is a nice yellow color. And every time we refresh this, we should get a different color as our page background. So this is kind of fun to do on certain websites. Like if you want to, like if the content is presented relatively plainly, to just have like a background color that can swap and be something different every time the user comes to it. And we can see that this is an easy way for us to get a random color that kind of stays in that same saturation family and that same lightness family. Right? Because if we want it to be a background, we might not want it to be too bright. So if we did a regular random number thing with our RGB values, we might get a super bright, bold color that stands out too much and diminishes our content. But using the HSL here, like we've done, we can take and we can standardize kind of what we're doing, so it can have the same saturation, it can have the same lightness, and so anything that's on the page doesn't have to, kind of play second fiddle to the background color. It can take the lead, and whatever background color our random number generator picks here can be appropriate, right? Like we can even pull and like if we wanted to mute it some more, we can like pull the saturation down, something like 25%. We'll save that. That'll automatically refresh that for us, and that'll give us a nice, more muted color here. Which is pretty good as well. Right, it's just a nice little muted color that just gives us a random background color. And we're able to do that using that HSL type of format. Now, I just thought that was a fun way to kind of look at it. And I do have a bigger demo here for us to do in just a little bit. So I'm going to comment this out to get rid of that and re-prepare this code for what I have in mind for us in just a bit. But before we write some more code, I'd like to look at just a few more things on our slide presentation in relation to color psychology. Right? And when we're talking about design, we are talking a lot about color psychology. Colors can produce different impressions. And, we have like a few standard associations here of color that you see there in the lower right-hand corner. However, these standard associations of color aren't universal. And so this kind of gets into what we talk about a lot in this class, right? When we're looking at people of different cultures, when we're looking at people of different ages, when we're looking at people that are different, they have different associations and different responses to these colors. And we see a great example of that here in the last two colors that are on the list, about how different cultures and different societies view culture differently. But we see things like red being stimulating. It could suggest anger, excitement, or danger, right? Also, like it said that like red can stimulate hunger, like that's part of the stimulation there. That's why a lot of the fast food restaurants that you see have red as one of their primary colors in their logo design. Orange increases mental sharpness, and it's associated with the fall, which we are about 1 week into fall now, so might be a good color to start using. Yellow creates a harmony or anxiety depending on the brightness, and might give you feelings of like sunshine. Green gives you a soothing feeling. It's often associated with nature. Blue kind of creates tranquility, peacefulness, also sadness. Could be associated with water. Another thing I've heard about blue is that we can associate it with productivity. right? Which is why the logo for Microsoft Word is blue, because it's productive. Purple suggests royalty and creativity. Now here's the last two. Black denotes elegance or evil. In some cultures, mourning, right? Like, especially in Western cultures here in like America, like when you're going to a funeral, people typically dress in all black. They're in mourning. However, check this out. White represents purity, cleanliness, and in some cultures, mourning. A friend of mine, his wife is Vietnamese. A few years ago, they had to return back to Vietnam to mourn a loved one who had passed away. And in that culture, when you are in mourning, when you are going to funerals, you wear white, as opposed to black. So you could probably see that as a culture shock, right? And so things like color have a different impact based on where your audience is from, based on where your clients are working in, based on who you're targeting for whatever you're doing. So this experience with color, like we can look at some of the associations and we can use those associations to help us build things. But it also goes back to that idea of how important research is. And what are people, our user base, how do they respond to one color versus another color? Now, one of the things that we'll find ourselves doing oftentimes is creating color themes. And a color theme is a combination of different hues that work together to create a color harmony. And in your module, you have a lot of written demonstrations and visualizations of these different color themes. And so when we're talking about color themes, we're talking about color harmony. And a color harmony is a cohesive and pleasing combination created by a group of colors. One of the easiest ones to kind of design with is a monochromatic theme. Right? It means that everything is a different shade or tint of one color. Right? So if we're using that HSL color theming, right, we can easily create a monochromatic color theme by just changing the saturation and lightness values of our colors. So we can start with one primary color and easily change it to have a secondary color or a tertiary color that's monochromatic by raising or lowering the saturation, raising or lowering the lightness. Now, while this is the easiest to design with, it's also the most subdued, right? And being subdued, it's kind of boring. You don't see a whole lot of contrast there, right? Like when in a couple of modules from now, we'll talk about our crap rules. And contrast is super important. In our crap rules, right? So if we want good contrast on our website, this isn't typically the way to do it, but it is a good and easy way to make an elegant, calm design. A complementary color theme. A complementary color theme includes two colors that sit directly across from one another on the color wheel. So like we looked at our color wheel earlier on, and we can see our complements. Green and magenta, yellow and blue, cyan and red, which are a little different than the complements that we're kind of used to again in kindergarten class, right? Because we're used to saying that our complementary colors are our, you can also call them the opposite colors. And in something that's, and in that subtractive color space, we see complementary colors like purple and yellow, red and green. Right? Because this schema of colors is mixed a little bit, right? Like instead of yellow being here, right, yellow should be here and orange should be here. In which case this should be purple in that complementary, in that paint mixing print color scheme there. But again, we're not working with print, we're working with digital, right? So our complementary colors are just a little bit different. And we can see kind of these pairings. And one of the big things that we can see in them is just how contrasty they are. Right? Like we immediately get hit with a shock of contrast between colors on opposing sides. And that's kind of the big point of doing a complementary color theme. Right? They kind of work together and make a nice, big, vibrant, exciting theme. But they give you that pop of contrast. And it really works the best, right, if you choose like one of the colors to be the main color and the other color to be like a small accent color. Right? That way you're not visually assaulting your user with these big, bold, dialectically opposed colors. Right? But it does work. We have an analogous color wheel, and these are colors that are right next to each other on the color wheel. So this would be something like red, orange, yellow, or yellow, green, cyan. Right? We take multiple colors that are right next to each other. They kind of work in that same color family. They don't have as much contrast as complementary colors, but still give us a good balance. Then we have the triadic color wheel, which is 3 evenly spaced colors from our color wheel. So again, if we go back and look at our color wheel here to make this make sense, we'd see red, green, and blue, magenta, yellow, and cyan as the big primaries here, because they are equally spaced across the color wheel. Now these give you a lot of contrast, a lot of energy. Now in general, one of the things that you might want to do to kind of help you with this is use a color palette generator. This is one of my favorites here. It's called Coolors, coolors.co, coolors.co. It's a fun little color palette generator. I can click start the generator there. I don't have to have an account, and I can just roll some colors. Right, and if I hover over here, I can see I can view shades. I can copy a hex value. I can take and I can select a new color based on several different modes here. And then I can take these color values and I can copy them. And I can paste them into different places. And I can adjust them accordingly. Like if I wanted to make, if I wanted to do a monochromatic color palette with this, I might bring that over there and bring up the luminance, that lightness value, to give me that. And then you could export this color palette, or you could take a screenshot of it. You even got some CSS here. It's pretty useful. Right, but what I'd like to do for a demonstration today that gives you some advanced coding practices is I would like to show you a way to create these color palettes programmatically with CSS. Right, so we still got our live server up here. Let's just create some basic structure. I've got some notes here, so I think I'll just copy my HTML over from the notes that I have. Just for the interest of time, we're just going to put in like a header, a main, a footer. Just give ourselves a little bit of structure. And then in our CSS file, we'll just take and put some, I'll just copy and paste some of the boilerplate that I have there, just to try to make the site look kind of nice. Like we have all of our reset rules there. We have that to help make it responsive. Let's take our header. And make it 20 pixels tall, or 20% tall, rather. I've got some fun stuff we're going to do with this header as well. Let's take our main. Let's give our main like a width of 80%. A height of 60%. And we'll just margin 0 auto that. To center it up. And we'll take our footer. We have about, let's see, that's 60%, that's 20%. That means we have 20% of the height left, so let's just make this a 20% height. And that'll work, right? Like that gives us a page. And just for the sake of kind of giving it a little contrast so we can see our colors, let's add a light gray to the background just to kind of, have a neutral color in the background. So on our body, we will add a background of my favorite light gray, #CCC. So when we save that, go to our live server, nice light gray background. So let's build a monochromatic color palette first. And I like to do this with CSS variables. CSS variables are enormous. Right, so to do this, we're going to use our root pseudo class. So that's going to be :root. And we use this to define our variables. Right, so in this case, we'll start off with a monochromatic here. And our monochromatic's kind of easy, right? Because it's going to be the same color. So what we could do is we could just kind of pick a color. Right, so we'll create a variable which is --main-color. And we'll create an HSL color from this. And just have it at just a random color right now. Let's say 185, 75%, 50%. And this will be our main color. Right, so since we know this is going to be our main color, and we're going to have maybe a lighter color and a darker color, I'm going to just copy and paste this a couple times. We'll call this light color. And we'll call this dark color. And so in order to work with this, we know that all we really have to do is manipulate that L value. So I can take one of them and up it to 80, one of them and lower it to 20. And just like that, I've created a monochromatic color palette here. So I can take and I can apply like a, let's say we go to my header, right? We make that background color here. Var main color. Maybe we have a... I'm going to do something a little different with the border in just a little bit. So let's add a border another way by using a box shadow with maybe like a 12 pixel offset on the bottom, no offset on the left and right, 12 pixel spread, no blurring, and we'll use var second color, or no, we called it light color. Well, var light color as the color of our line there. Main, we'll make that white, right? And footer, we'll make that the dark color. So that'll be background var dark color. Save that, zoom out. And so now if we go back to our live server here, we can see our monochromatic color theme in action. Where is our box shadow there? Did we write that right? It's there. You know what? I transposed the numbers. I knew I'd do that. That is the third place there is the blur place. The fourth place is the spread place. I want it to be a solid line, so I want that in the fourth place. There we go. Now we can see it there. The problem now is, though, that our main there is above that. So I can fix that with a little bit of z-indexing. So if I take my header and I set it to position relative z-index 1, that will bring it to the top. All right, so now I have a lower bottom, a lower border that I didn't use as a border. And I have this monochromatic theme. Pretty nice, not bad, right? Some monochromatic colors. So one of the things that we could do here, like we go back and we see we have this same color here, right? If we created a new variable called hue and set that equal to just a number like 185, then we could use that variable in these colors, var hue, var hue, var hue. So now if we want to change like the color theme, we can just change this one number here. I can make it something like 60, right? And so that'll put it in like the yellow range, right? So now once we save that, our live server should have some yellow colors on it, right? And we can just kind of go through and we can do various things here. We could take and we could work with this in JavaScript and figure that out, right? Like when we could do various other things. And so once we have this set up like this, this creates our monochromatic color palette for us. I can type in any number that I want to change the entire color palette. and change the entire site as we go along. Right, which is pretty cool. So let's comment this out. And for the interest of time, let's do one more color palette. And let's do like a bigger one. And hopefully like you can take what you learn off the bigger one that we'll do here. Let's do a triadic. Right, and I'll even write a comment here that says like 4 monochromatic color palette. Let's do a bigger one here that'll fix us for the triadic. So we want 3 colors that are equidistant across the color wheel, right? So there are 120 degrees between all the colors, right? Because there's 360 degrees in a circle. So if we take 360, divide it by the 3 colors that we need, that means we need each of our colors to be 120 degrees apart. So keep that in mind, right? So we'll use our root pseudo class. And we'll start the same way. We'll create our hue variable. And we'll give it just some arbitrary number, like let's do 176. It's just arbitrary. Now let's do hue 2. Now since we said that when we're dealing with HSL colors, we just keep going around and around and around as our numbers go up. Or go down past 0, right? So I could take our variable that's in our hue and calculate that. I also need my calc function here. Calculate that. Because it's CSS, I need that calc function. Minus 120. So whatever my hue value at 176 is, we subtract 120 from it to get 120 degrees away. And we have our hue 2. And we could do something similar for our hue 3. Right? So this is our hue 3. And we can add 120 to it. So for our hue 2, we're going counterclockwise. For our hue 3, we're going clockwise. It's all good, doesn't matter. Right, so now let's change these. We'll use the same variable names just so we don't have to change any of our variable names here. Like we'll use main color, light color, and dark color, even though that won't really apply anymore. Main color will be HSL var hue, and I need that, comma 75%, comma 50%. Right, and since we know how to be successful here, we can just copy this to save ourselves some time. C and V. This will be our light color. Even though it's not going to be a lighter color, it's just going to be our second hue. I just don't want to go through and change all these variable names. And this will be our dark color. This will be HSL var hue 3. 75%, comma 50%. And so now I'm letting math do the work for me, and I'm programmatically calculating a triadic color palette based on whatever my primary color value on that color wheel is. So we'll make sure we save. We go back to our live server, and we see we have this now, right? And this is our triadic colors. We can see we have this cyan, we can see we have this yellow, and we can see we have this magenta. And so if I just change that one number there I have in hue, and I can make it something like 220, right? In this case, we should have, well, one of our colors should be red. Let's see it. And we got this red here on the bottom, blue here on the top, green here as our accent, right? Which is pretty cool, right? We've just created this color palette programmatically with little effort. And so similarly, we could do similar things to develop our own complementary color palettes, develop our own analogous color palettes, right? Just using that distance from color to color on the color wheel, right? Like if we're going complementary, we're moving 180 degrees. So we'd want a difference or addition of 180 degrees there, which is going to be the same thing. Or if we're using that analogous, we're moving 60 degrees from color to color. So one color might be plus 60, one color might be minus 60. They might both be plus, you might do plus 60 and plus 120. Whatever, right? This gives you the ability to make a programmatically generated color palette in one of these color themes that you can just change quickly and easily by changing one number in your CSS template. You get something totally different. And so, like I said, I just scratched the surface of what we can do with color today, right? And I went through it really, really quickly. And we've already flown past our timing there. We're way past the hour mark now. So this is where we'll stop for today. We'll try to put this in a GitHub so we can share this with you as well. But if anybody's here hanging out with me, I will hang out in the chat for just a couple minutes and take your questions. If you're watching this later and you have any questions, let me know. Send me a Teams message, send me an email. But that's all that I have for you for today. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time. Oh, remember, no class next week. Week after.